Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue, Gisukukit, Y Wait. Thank you for joining the Kootenay Conservation Program's first Conservation Ambassador Training webinar of the year. This is another three-part installation of the series that we started in 2021. My name is Camille Roberge. I'm the KCP Stewardship Coordinator, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Juliet and Kendall are also here with KCP to help the event run smoothly. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the rich heritage of stewardship in the Kootenay region and acknowledging that KCP's work occurs in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, Sinixt, and Syilx peoples, who have lived here and stewarded the land and water since time immemorial. We are always very grateful to the funders and supporters of KCP, without whom we couldn't offer these types of programs. For those of you who are new to the Kootenay Conservation Program, known as KCP, we're a broad partnership that was founded in 2002, and we currently are comprised of 85 land and water conservation and stewardship groups, First Nations, government agencies, resource industries, and agricultural producers that are all working throughout the East and West Kootenays. Our mandate is to coordinate and facilitate conservation efforts on private land and to generate the support and resources needed to maintain this effort. A key aspect of conservation in the Kootenay region is private land stewardship. KCP supports stewardship organizations that conduct landowner outreach by contributing technical and financial capacity, as well as opportunities for better coordination, effectiveness, and synergies. These training sessions are born out of our commitment to building stewardship capacity while creating a collaborative community of stewardship providers in the Kootenays. We've created the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit. It's an online directory where you can easily find all of our partners and the programs that they run to help with stewardship of private land in the Kootenays. The toolkit is available on our website at kootenayconservation.ca/toolkit. And so far, it's proving to be better than Google in helping people search and find local groups, programs, resources, and tools. The services in the toolkit are organized into 14 conservation neighborhoods. So when you're on the website, you'll see this map, and you simply click on your conservation neighborhood to see the stewardship solutions that are specific to your area. And you'll be brought to a page like this that lists all of the organizations, services, and opportunities in a grid format. And you can click on any of these tiles to learn more about each program. Today's training includes information on several programs in the toolkit, including the RDCK's Fire Smart program, which we can see listed here. KCP is using the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit as the basis for this Conservation Ambassador Training program to help diversify knowledge within organizations about these private land stewardship information and programs that are available in the region. And we're running 3 modules this year. Today, we're focusing on stewarding for wildfire resilience, including managing wildfire risk and considering wildlife and habitat when planning mitigations. In November, we'll learn about coexistence strategies for wildlife. And in December, we'll learn about stewarding riparian and foreshore habitats. Those of you that participate in all 3 training modules will receive a Conservation Ambassador certificate from KCP, similar to this one from the previous series we did. And here's our agenda of our time together. So we'll begin with 2 15-minute presentations, followed by a Q&A. Then we'll have some time in small breakout rooms to get to know each other and to deepen our learning. And then we'll reconvene and have closing comments at the end. So today, our 2 presenters are Garrett Fishlock and Richard Klafki. Garrett is the RDCK's Fire Smart program coordinator. Garrett's background is as a structural and wildland firefighter, where he saw the devastating effects of wildfire. This spurred him to his role today, which focuses on education and prevention as a way to create a positive impact in the communities in the RDCK. Garrett and his team work hard to provide unique solutions to each individual's fire smart situation. Over the last few years, his team has completed over 300 assessments of individual properties annually, worked with over 30 neighborhood recognition programs, and processed over 100 rebates each year. Thank you, Garrett, for taking out your time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And Richard is the director of the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Canadian Rockies program. Richard gained a broad range of experience as a consulting biologist on ecosystem restoration, species at risk inventories, and other wildlife research projects before joining NCC. He now is responsible for directing and managing conservation projects defined by a science-based planning framework, building strong relationships, and coordinating stewardship priorities within the expansive Canadian Rockies program area. Please welcome Richard Klafki. All right, so I will stop sharing my screen, and Garrett, you can take it from here.
Okay. Thanks for that, and thanks for having me, and everybody for joining. I'm just gonna share my screen. And get going. Okay. That look good to everybody?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction there. Yeah, I'm the RDCK Fire Smart Program Coordinator, and we'll hop right into it. So what we're going to cover, we don't have a ton of time, but we'll talk about wildfire in British Columbia and how we got here. So a bit of a history. How do homes ignite from a wildfire? Briefly get into some mitigation strategies, and then programs we offer and how to get involved. So I'll talk more about the fire smart side, and then Richard can kind of fill in some of the how that can coincide with, conservation and working with the environment. So how do we get here? These 4 photos sort of tell a story. So that top left photo, that's just showing sort of some of the health issues within our forest today, whether that be from drought, heat domes, disease, or for pine beetles, just creating more dead, dying fuel within the forest. The top right photo shows wildfire suppression that we've been doing for close to 100 years, removing wildfire from the landscape in lots of areas. The bottom left shows the wildland-urban interface that most of us in the Kootenays live in here. So we keep developing further and further into the forest, and that's where we see this interaction with wildfire in our homes. And then the bottom right is showing just a history of sort of monoculture and forestry practices with, tight stands like lodgepole pine and what have you. A brief look at the past here, specifically around the Nelson area. A lot of our forests were reset close to 100 years ago. Early explorers looking for minerals and whatnot would just set fire to almost everywhere in the West Kootenays because it created easier access to get to those minerals. So it sort of brings up the question of how natural are our forests? Everything was reset close, most things were reset close to 100 years ago, and now we've seen wildfire suppression for close to 100 years. That's why when you go to some of these mountainsides, we see a lot of built up dead fuels on the ground that might not be there in a completely undisturbed natural setting. This is just showcasing that wildfire seasons are getting more intense and more extreme throughout the years. You'll see back into the 1950s, we'd have a big fire season every 10 to 20 years roughly. And now 5 of our biggest 10 fire seasons have come in the last, 5 of our biggest fire seasons have come in the last 10 years. I don't have all the numbers for 2023 yet, but it's sure to be well off the charts here. Are all wildfires bad? No. They can reset the forest in a sense. They can reduce built-up debris. Some species depend on it for new growth. More frequent fires result in less intense fires and higher survival rates. It can also create a fire break for years to come. So sometimes having a a fire near a community that doesn't affect it can be the best case scenario. You'll see BC Wildfire Service putting more and more fires into what's called modified response if they're not likely to interact with the wildland urban interface. So what is the wildland urban interface? It's I briefly touched on it, but it's defined as about 1 to 2 kilometers into structures from unbroken forests. So within the Kootenays, that's almost everywhere. You take downtown Nelson, Kimberley, Creston, you can draw a line to unbroken forest fuels. And the reason that's so large is due to embers and then wildfires transferring to these man-made fuels and becoming a structure to structure problem. So this is the disaster sequence. This photo is from the 2011 Slave Lake fire in Alberta. And what we see is the same, sorry, I'm just going to move this around. What we see is the same sequence over and over again with all disasters in wildland fires. So we see severe wildfire potential, which consists of extreme fuels, weather, and topography. We get extreme burning conditions that interact with our highly ignitable homes. We then see numerous ignitions, firefighting resources are quickly overwhelmed, and their effectiveness is reduced, and we see disaster like we see in the photo here. So what can we control within this disaster sequence? We can affect some of the extreme fuels through landscape level fuel reduction and what have you. And they are effective, but it is also unrealistic to do that throughout the entire Kootenays, right? With all of these little communities and what have you, they're expensive, they're tough to maintain. So what can we really control on a large scale? That's the highly ignitable homes piece. So keep that in mind as we move through here. So this is a summary of Dr. Jack Cohen's paper from his findings of the 2021 Lytton wildfire. One thing that when he presented this was these aren't unique. These are the same sort of findings. He makes his whole career has been going to all these disasters throughout North America, and he often comes to the exact same findings here. So I'll just run through them here from Lytton. Embers were key in fire spread rate. It is unrealistic to expect a successful initial attack response. Within 1 hour, 20 primary structures were quickly involved. So these are extreme burning conditions starting very close to homes. It's very unrealistic to expect BC Wildfire Service to be able to respond that fast. The rapid involvement of this many structures would have overwhelmed any reasonable structure protection response in the area. Urban interface fire disasters are a structure ignition problem. Fire spread was principally determined by highly vulnerable ignition conditions within individual home ignition zones. So home ignition zone is roughly 30 meters out from each home. And that's what really principally matters in a structured defense against wildfire. It's at 30 meters home ignition zone. Non-combustible building materials are effective in preventing structure-to-structure fire spread. And for individual structures and communities, ignition resistance is the most effective approach for reducing wildfire risk and preventing disasters. So number 8 is the big takeaway there. Ignition resistance is the most effective approach. So how do we prevent structure fires? Often you'll see photos like this in the media after a wildfire moves through, and it'll be portrayed like, why did that home get so unlucky? Or how did those 2 homes get so lucky? And we know now through research and visiting all these disasters that it probably wasn't so much luck as it was how these homes were set up due to their landscaping and building construction. So there's 3 processes by which a combustible building material can light on fire. The first one is radiant heat. So that's us standing around a campfire. That's the heat you feel on your skin from that fire. That's radiant heat. And research has proven that this is a very ineffective way of lighting something on fire. When the forest is burning, it'll often burn very hot, but then die down very quickly too. So it doesn't burn hot enough for long enough for the radiant heat alone to light something like wood siding on fire. You need that sustained radiant heat for upwards of 20 minutes to actually maintain combustion. Direct flame, on the other hand, is a very effective way of lighting something on fire, right? We put the piece of wood in the fire, direct flame, it immediately lights on fire. And embers. So embers and direct flame contact are why most homes are lost in a wildfire. So you see embers, thousands of embers blowing in, like hitting the home and then falling to the base of the home or in the gutters, and then lighting all of these combustible items we have around our home on fire, which then provides that direct flame contact. So this is a video I'll show you from the 2016 Fort McMurray fires, and it just showcases a lot of what we're talking about here. So I'll just talk you through it. So first off, look at the biker here. He's feeling the heat quite a bit. That's that radiant heat we're talking about. Also, just observe the flame size and intensity on our left here. So, and then watch how fast that dies down. It's about as intense a fire as you'll see in that fuel type. And that radiant heat from that fire would never be enough to light those homes across the street on fire. So, it's far enough away. We're not seeing direct flame contact. The radiant heat will never be enough. But we do see embers starting to cross the road and starting small spot fires like you can see now. So that fire is already starting to die down, but we're seeing embers landing on the truck coming across there. The fire department is just driving by these fires because they just get dispatched to a random address that has reported a fire, and they can't deal with all of these spot fires because there's going to be thousands, right? So those spot fires, which are in some sort of a juniper or cedar hedge, are growing quickly. The wind pushes them into the vinyl combustible siding, and we see that direct flame contact we're talking about. So that home is now likely lost due to the direct flame contact, which then creates that structure to structure fire spread. So just in that one example, if we remove those two juniper cedar hedges there that caught on fire from embers, there would have been no way for that fire to transfer to those homes because through radiant heat or direct flame contact. But just that one chink in the armor in the neighborhood is likely enough to create that destruction. So what do we look at on the building? So the building is our main focus. And then we sort of take a roof down, walls out approach because it's the most important part. So when we're doing an assessment, we'll look at everything. We'll start at the roof, gutters, fascia, the exterior walls, the deck, and then move out into the yard, including the non-combustible zone. So it's quite a detailed look at every little facet of the home and anywhere an ember could potentially penetrate. So the home ignition zone, moving out into the yard a bit. These names have changed a bit, but the distances are still the same. So that non-combustible zone is 0 to 1.5 meters. And that is by far the most important part. So we want to see that zone be almost entirely non-combustible. So instead of bark mulch, maybe a gravel or bare mineral soil, something like that. And that is where we need to actually be quite strict because that's going to guarantee, that's where all the embers are going to land. And that's what's going to provide that direct flame contact. And then, so we want to see very little plant growth there. And if there is, they should be low growing deciduous flower type varieties. Moving out into zone 1 out to 10 meters. So we have a bit more tolerance there, right? We should still see mostly non-combustible deciduous varieties. So we can still have trees within zone 1. We ask that most of them are of a deciduous variety, whether that be maple, walnut, anything like that. And then there is still room for conifers in zone 1. But ideally they're large mature conifers that we can limb up a ways. Zone 2 and 3, so out to 30 meters is principally what we're focused on. And we can still have lots of conifers in that zone because we're out far enough where they're not going to provide that direct flame contact. So we just want to see them spaced and surface fuels removed really well in there and still maintain deciduous varieties. The other key thing within zone 1 there is that we don't want to see any accessory structures within that area or firewood or stored combustibles. If they are in there, we want to see them in a mitigated structure, that like a shed that is mitigated the same standards as the home. If you can't do that, we ask that you move them out of the 10-meter zone, because outside of 10 meters, that radiant heat is highly unlikely to ignite the home. So briefly, just getting into fuel management 101. Like I mentioned, we want to start at the home and work out. So that's where we're going to focus our attention, is close to the home. And then once we're done that, we're going to work out. So in the order of importance in terms of surface fuels, ladder fuels, and crown fuels, we want to see homeowners primarily focused on surface and ladder fuels, because that's how the fire actually gets up into the crown. And then further, a fire in that top right photo, that if it does get into the crown, it's highly unlikely to move for very long, because wildfires don't just move in the crown itself. It needs that surface heating and that intensity from the ground to continue moving like that. The other reason for that is it's achievable for most homeowners to clean the surface and cut off the branches without as much need to fall big trees and create, crown fuel breaks. That photo on the bottom there is something I took. So that is one property where on the right side, the homeowner did fuel mitigation over the course of a few years, roughly 50 years ago, and never touched the side on the left. So just the resiliency and the health of the forest is quite easy to see there. Landscape level fuel management, it does work. It is proven to slow or stop wildfires. It can create healthier fires, whether that be from, so typically they are either hand treatments, machine treatments, or prescribed burns. So we're going to see a lot more prescribed burns hopefully in the future, because they're very effective in controlling wildfire and creating a healthier ecosystem. But again, the downside is they're expensive, they're difficult to do, and it's unrealistic to expect us to be able to fuel manage the entire forest around all communities and maintain them for years to come. So Fire Smart programs that we offer, and most other regional districts in the Kootenays offer similar programming. So reach out to your local fire department or regional district or municipality to see what they offer. But we do Fire Smart home assessments through the Home Partners program. So that looks like a wildfire mitigation specialist coming out to a homeowner's home and spending 1 to 2 hours with them, going over all of their recommendations. So like that's a really detailed assessment of the home and the yard. The homeowner gets about a 20 to 30-page report detailing everything that we find on there. And one nice thing about it is nothing is mandatory from that assessment. It's free to the homeowner. They're not obligated to do anything. They can choose what they want to do. And we're focusing on all sorts of things. We're not just looking at the big, change your siding. There's also tons of little cheap, easy things homeowners can do to significantly reduce their risk. And then from that, you can get a rebate. So right now it's currently up to $1,000. So it's a unique rebate in the sense that you can actually do the work yourself and value your own time at $29 an hour and then that can add up, and then you can get $1,000 back for just completing that. You don't have to share any of that information with insurance or anything like that. They're not involved. The neighborhood recognition program is a community-run sort of grassroots level program that focuses on the community. So we'll go out, do an assessment, and that looks like a neighborhood of 5 to 50 homes generally, working together to collectively reduce their wildfire hazard. You can get national recognition for doing so. So how can you guys, as mostly people who are going out to homes and whatnot, help? So number one is just replace these common misconceptions we see from homeowners. So no, you do not have to remove all the trees. Um, as I described in the different zones there, there's a ton of tolerance for different, conifers and forest types. Like we'll never go to a home and tell them to cut down all of their trees. That is not something we're going to do. We're focused on creating unique solutions for homeowners to maintain like a beautiful wildland living aesthetics and conservation around their home. Fire smart doesn't have to be expensive. It can be as simple as cleaning your gutters or raking up your leaves to significantly reduce hazard. And the most important place is to start on or near the home. So most homeowners we go to, they want to start in the forest way away because that's where forest fires come from, right? But that's not the best approach. We want to start near the home. When you're talking to homeowners, just recommend they get involved. It's free. It's an hour or two of their time, and it's confidential. They have nothing to lose from that. And then provide resources in the next steps for them. So here's some contacts and more information. I don't know if you want to take a photo of that or something, but it's pretty easy to find your local Fire Smart program by just Googling your local regional district or municipality and Fire Smart. The Fire Smart BC webpage is really good. They have a lot of good info on there. And then that second link is for resource downloads. So you can order a bunch of brochures and whatnot for free off their website, or you can download them all for free there at that link. So lots of good info there. And that's it. I think there's time for questions later, so I'll stop sharing and hand it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Garrett. That was such a great presentation. As Garrett mentioned, we'll be doing all the questions at the end of both presentations after Richard's presentation. If you didn't have a chance to screenshot Garrett's last slide, don't worry. I'll be sending out an email to all the participants with all of the links and documents and whatnot related to both presentations today. So Richard, would you like to share your screen? And
Sure. Thanks. Let me know. Okay, how's that?
yes, that's great.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Garrett for the intro. I think looking at the participant list, I think many of you will be savvy to some of the sort of considerations for wildlife, particularly in the Kootenays, that actually have Fire Smart and wildlife considerations complement each other. So as Garrett was saying, I think near the home, it's really important to focus on reducing the direct fire impacts. You could replace these junipers and cedars with wildflowers for pollinators down low, keep it green. Mason bee boxes, bird houses. I think that sort of stuff you could, for around the home, have a low fire risk for those species. You could replace around the base of your home, put that maybe a gravel and rock near the base, and I mean that's good for amphibians and salamanders as well. So that also helps reduce the risk of fire near the home. But I've sort of wanted to focus on, as you get away from the home, that's where I have more experience, and I think many of you do too, in ecosystems in the Kootenays. This one that Garrett had earlier, there's everything from ponderosa pine, which is a fire-resistant species, to the cedar in here. I think another take-home is that, as he mentions, you don't have to necessarily remove all the big trees around your home. Some of them may have defects and still be alive and have cavities in them currently, and those are the ones you might want to retain. You could even take out probably some of these smaller diameter conifers in here just to even more emulate sort of the variety of fire. The spark on them on some trees that have fissures or lightning strikes can host a variety of species as well. The interesting thing about having large trees near the home too is like Garrett was saying, you could take a lighter or a torch and put it against a tree and you're not going to start very, very much. But if you remove those fine fuels and There's the fine fuel moisture code that kind of also firefighters use to assess risk. If you can remove a lot of that, you're really benefiting the reduction in fire. And, even in this photo, there's still a bit of leaf and litter and duff that, soil organisms and invertebrates can exist in. And then this photo too, this one, when we first did our dry run with Garrett, it's like, the stand on the right, it's thinned. It could be maybe even thinner in a wildfire, like after wildfire ecosystem type habitat type. But like they've pruned the lower branches. Wildfire will often take out lower branches. They're Douglas fir. They have thick bark that can withstand fire. So this fire smarting actually, in a way, kind of can mimic the fire ecosystems that we have in the Kootenays, retention of the larch and the ponderosa pine, all those sort of fire resistant species, taking out the small understory. It's promotes the bunch grasses often, if it's not rhizomatous grasses or forming beds of grass, and those are also tend to be less flashy than branches and fine fuels. This was another great photo that Garrett provided. And I just wanted to mention, like on this one, obviously the left side is like a campfire waiting to happen sort of thing. But on the right side, where they've cleared out a lot of the fine fuels, even if there was a larger diameter, coarse woody debris laying on the ground, absorbing moisture, when you collect firewood, if it's off the ground, it's dry, that's what you want because it burns well. But if it's laying on the ground for a couple of years, it gets really punky, it absorbs the ground moisture. That stump on the right is probably going to be good for ants, woodpeckers, bears ripping the stump apart in the future. So I think you can blend that sort of mix of removing a lot of your fine fuels, but still having large coarse woody debris farther away from the home. Promoting the deciduous and riparian areas on your property. If you have any sort of wet area or little aspen stands, or as Garrett said, even planting some of these things. This photo on the left is from the Island Pond wildfire in 2017. It's dry under that green grass, but it's primarily aspen forest in that zone. And the wildfire skipped over large areas of this aspen stand adjacent to the pond, Island Pond. And on the right, you can see how it's dense conifers, and it just took them all out. There's maybe a few are going to live, and that's the sort of the structural complexity of wildfire. But the conifers on the left in the background, a lot of them remained unburned or lightly scorched. And I think if you can, promote aspen or birch or maple, as Garrett said, on your property, or even wet areas, you don't need to try to dry them out all the time. It's really important too for slowing down wildfire risk. And, our systems evolved with that too in the Kootenays, both east and west. And then of course, for things like Lewis's woodpecker in the East Kootenay, primarily too, is the snag on the right is actually a power pole that was retained, and open forests with like these poles or a wildlife tree. If you don't have the fuels around the base of the tree, these sorts of things can be retained on the hillsides around your property. And obviously, if there's pine beetle and you have a lot of trees dying, you might want to assess them and remove them. But if you can just leave even one or two that aren't connected to the canopy, that might go a long ways while still reducing fire risk. Same goes for bats. We're doing a lot of bat pole installations these days, mimicking that's a Brandon bark at the top. The sloughing of bark, like the bat here on the left, is under the bark of a wildlife tree. So, a handful of natural wildlife trees on your property, we always tend to remove them. And, in low densities, it's probably good to keep them on the landscape. And then even some critter piles, when you're thinning your forest around your place, if you leave these larger bowls on the ground in a pile, you can have squirrel middens in them. Insects get in them, the ants get into them, and then sapsuckers and bears can take them apart and get the forage in there. Often they're called weasel piles or whatever, and that's also because small rodents will tend to use these. So just having a few of these in the vicinity, in the neighborhood, is probably not necessarily the worst thing in a fire smart landscape. And then invasive species, of course, cheatgrass. Here's the bad example here, or a bad actor on the landscape. They tend to burn hotter. They cause more frequent fires. Invasive grasses are quite an issue, I think, both in the, well, definitely in the East Kootenay, and I'm assuming the West Kootenay. If you can promote native bunch grasses on your property, even the low growing ones, they don't ignite into flames as easily, and it's slow the spread of fire. And being bunch grasses, there's usually often it's non-continuous fuel as well. There's sort of open patches of earth between the bunches. And then, of course, this is really important. In the past, the cultural burning has existed on the landscape, which was also probably in concert with natural lightning strikes. And Garrett talked about large landscape level fuel breaks and mechanical thinning, and yet those are very costly. And prescribed fire, it is a more cost-effective tool. It promotes plants, especially cultural burning, things like balsam root and huckleberries, camas. These are all culturally significant plants, and they also tend to, when they grow back, to be less fire prone. On the left is the firekeepers from California, where they actually have their own indigenous crews starting fires. And on the right is from the Savinaw area, where they were just recently, in the last few years, starting their own cultural fires. Joe Kilchrist is the gentleman in the middle there with his drip torch. So, you can do your stuff around your home, but I think if your acceptance of prescribed burning in the future, a bit of smoke in the spring versus large wildfires in the summer, that might go a long ways to keeping everybody's community safer. And then finally, there's all these resources out there. From KCP, that's the top left there with the Kootenay Lake Stewardship Solutions toolkit I put up there. Webinars, Lori Daniels, Faculty of Forestry, about wildfire and wildlife coexistence. And I found this paper from 2007 where they showed that fire smarting in Jasper National Park actually does work well with the local ecosystems. Probably the biggest management issue would be dealing with like pure lodgepole pine forests. They're evolved as large disturbances, large wildfires. So that might be challenging, but I think in the Kootenays, many of our urban interface doesn't necessarily have that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to wrap up with that final slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. If you, maybe just stop sharing and then we can go into gallery view. And if folks want to turn their cameras on so we can all see each other, that'd be great if you're comfortable with that. And so we actually have lots of time for questions. There is absolutely no rush. So please feel free. Any question's a good question. You can raise your little hand icon. You can type your question in the chat if you like, or you can just go for it. Unmute and go for it. Okay, maybe I'll start if people are feeling a bit shy. So I have a question for Richard. So you were saying, like, we all know, or most of us, I'm sure, know the value of these wildlife trees, these sort of like decaying trees or trees with faults. And you're saying that it's okay to keep them on your property, on the landscape, if you sort of are able to remove a lot of the ignition sources around the tree. Would that affect how species use the wildlife tree if they have sort of a big open area or something around the tree? I don't know.
Well, it sort of depends on the ecosystem and the species at risk, or the species that are using the wildlife tree. Lewis's woodpeckers really do prefer the wide open areas. Williamson sapsuckers, however, they prefer kind of an open larch forest. But I think that's where, if you have any trees just that are still alive with defects, generally having an open understory around them will promote most of the species that require wildlife trees that have been lost due to sort of us always cleaning up forest, firewood cutters. And, you know, if it's not an extensive amount of wildlife trees, it's not really going to increase the fire risk much. On some of our ecosystem restoration projects where prescribed burns have happened, crews have gone out ahead of time and even raked the duff and the litter away, and even wrapped trees to retain them in case that, you know, the hot fire got a little too hot during a prescribed fire. So I think most of the species that require wildlife trees that we are trying to promote don't mind having it clean around the base.
Awesome, thank you.
Garrett, I have a question for you. Do you go so far as to make recommendations as to building materials or retrofits that are less flammable than others? Like, I'm assuming metal siding, sort of hardy board, those sorts of things?
Yeah, for sure. That's another common misconception too, is that, yes, so to answer your question, we certainly do. So we'll look at everything, and normally every mitigation has two options to it, right? So take wood siding, for example. We can replace that wood siding with something non-combustible like metal, stucco, or cement fiber hardy board, or we can reduce the chance of fire interacting with that wood siding by just putting 6 inches of non-combustible material at the base, because embers are going to hit that wood siding and they're not going to ignite the siding where they touch it, but they're all going to land at the base, pile up, and create a hot glowing combustion. So if we can just create 6 inches of non-combustible material at the base of a wall, and reduce the chance of nearby combustibles providing direct flame contact, wood siding is fine. So what I'm getting at is almost all of our recommendations have two kind of options to them, and we'll provide those to homeowners where it's not black and white, it's gray, and we'll kind of work with the homeowners to see what they want out of this assessment and give them different options to achieve that with based on how they want to set up their home.
Is there a public resource of the ratings of the combustibility of all the different building materials?
Yeah, on that FireSmart BC website, I believe there is a home building guide that will list most of that stuff.
Okay, great.
That's a pretty good guide.
Thanks, Garrett.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Marcy, I see you raised your hand. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Just figure out how to lower it. Okay. So I have a question. I don't know if it's for Garrett or Richard, but so big burn piles that are out there either on private land or out there on Crown land, is there any I don't know, change of thought in terms of how to be managing fuels like that? I know a lot of my neighbors, we even have big burn piles here where I live, and we've got Crown land around us with them, and I'm just sort of seeing them as potential sources maybe of you know, ignition. But just wondering if there's any new thinking on big burn piles of slash and other things.
I can start, Richard, maybe, and then you can speak to the potential like next level thinking on the burn piles. But well, yeah, burn piles are a wildfire hazard. They're better than having those forest fuels displaced across the entire forest floor. I think it's much better to have a small intense fire localized in one place that will affect a few trees around it, as opposed to having those fuels spread out across the entire floor, because that's going to spread an intense fire and likely get into the canopy of many trees. So while they're not ideal to be left sitting around, they are better than just being displaced across the forest floor. So that's sort of a fire hazard perspective on it.
I can add to that. I know a lot of restoration sites, you know, from Cranbrook Community Forest. They're trying to figure out a way to not burn all their slash debris piles. And there's talk, and I don't know what progress there's been, but in opening up small scale biochar units where you can actually bring the slash in or chip it, and then they burn it at a really hot temperature and actually provide a product, a biochar product that can be used as fertilizer, can be spread on fields. So I know there's been some trials done in these CUNYs, but I'm not sure if we're there yet where you can start going around and bringing all these piles and woody debris to a central facility. But they're exploring it. I know the Tanaha Development Corporation has talked to people about exploring that as well, because they have lots of areas that they like to see thinned and chipped and not necessarily burned. So there's some movement on that, but I don't know whether that's going to be in legislation anytime soon.
I just wanted to add to something from my presentation, just touching on like just that shift in public perception around wildfires and them always being bad. A lot of people have that keen sense of we need to put out every fire we see on the landscape, and we're really trying to shift that perception that not all wildfires are bad and they have been part of the ecosystem for forever. So it's really up to you guys too when you're talking with homeowners and out in the field to sort of help spread that message, because exclusion isn't an option. If we live in the wildland urban interface, one day or another wildfires will come to our doorstep, and it's just whether or not we're prepared for them and accepting the fact that they are going to happen. And the more wildfire we can expose to the landscape, realistically, the better off we are. Kind of alluding to what Richard said too, it's a really good quote I heard is, how do you want your smoke? Do you want your smoke in little controlled doses in the spring, or do you want a total whiteout in August every year for massive wildfires burning across the province? So it's something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually, I had to have a question leading off of that. So like when we're on a property, working with invasive species or whatever we're doing there, and we want to initiate, a conversation with the landowner about maybe some fire smarting, what is like the biggest barrier that stops people from just reaching out? Like, what is the biggest worry or concern or negative view that a landowner might have that would stop them from reaching out to you?
Yeah, kind of. I think primarily you get a variety of them, but a lot of people just inherently don't want someone from the RDCK coming on the property because they're worried about privacy concerns or what have you. That's why we really emphasize that this is a private assessment. We don't share it with anybody. Nobody sees your assessment other than your assessor, and it's all stored on a secure database. And then the other big one is just people think we're going to come in and tell them to remove all of their trees and wildlife from around their home. And that is almost never the case. I will very rarely even ask a homeowner to remove a tree. Because it's like I was saying to Chelsea, there is different options, right? So we can either remove all the combustibles around, or we can look at each combustible tree and figure out how to mitigate that specific tree, whether it be removing a bit of fuels from the base, limbing it up, and looking for easy wins where we can create canopy breaks, whether that even planting a deciduous tree amongst a group of conifers is going to help. The other thing is, even in that zone 1, within 10 meters, it's more the small immature shrubs and trees that we're worried about, because they're the ones that are going to like transfer fire to the big trees and then expose the home to direct flame contact. If we can limb a tree up, if it's old enough, mature enough to do so, to be most of the fuel above the non-combustible level of the roof, that's okay. We can leave that tree every time, because heat travels up. So most of that heat, if any, is going to only be exposed to the non-combustible roof of the home. So
Awesome.
yeah, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah, those are probably the two biggest misconceptions that we need to sort of alleviate.
Yeah, thank you so much. And feel free, guys, if you don't feel comfortable talking in front of the whole group, if you have a question, you can just put it in the chat and I can read it out. While we're waiting to see if anyone's going to type in a question, I had a question for Richard. Have you had a chance on any of the Nature Conservancy of Canada properties to do any sort of cultural burning? Like, is that sort of something you've done in the past or are thinking of doing?
We are very much interested in thinking of doing it. And in the past, the blockage was the hiring contractors to do a burn plan and administer a prescribed burn was very costly. And we've made some really good advancement recently with the BC Wildfire Service, that they, being conservation properties, many of them are private land, and they don't usually conduct prescribed fires on private lands. But we are working with letters of understanding, MOUs, waivers to advance that, and that's in the works. And I think if Nevada's still on here, I know I'm trying to meet with the Kiskanook First Nation, and brought up that that down the road we'd like to do a prescribed fire. And
Oh no. Did we lose Richard?
this fall to have oh, am I here?
Oh no. Richard, do you want to try talking again?
Yeah. When did you lose me? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now. Yeah, you were just talking about yeah, reaching out to Kiskanook. Yeah.
Yeah, so we like to have them present if we are ever able to actually get a prescribed fire pulled off with the BC Wildfire Service. And you know, a lot of that is timing and seasonality, and but we're really promoting it and trying to get that off the ground.
Oh, that's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Richard, because I was actually just thinking about that when that question was brought up, especially Lot 48 area. I would love to be involved with that. We actually have just hired a Fire Smart worker on a Kiskanook to specifically deal with Fire Smart on a Kiskanook. We've actually just also hired one of our band members as well, who has been going around the reserve and doing fire reduction around homes and around the main highway there.
Oh, that is awesome, Nevada. I'm so happy to hear that. Okay, so I think we're getting ready for our time to do our breakout rooms. So let me just get my little instructions here for the breakout rooms. So we're going to randomly assign everyone to breakout rooms on Zoom with about 4 to 5 people per room. And we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for our discussions. So in each breakout room, we're going to begin with just some quick introductions, who you are, your organization, where you're from. And then each person can just take a few minutes to share their answers on 3 questions. And Juliet will type the questions into the chat box within each breakout room, but I'll just review the questions quickly here as well. So the 3 questions we have are, given what you just learned, what could you incorporate into your work? Why is it important? And how will you do it? So again, if you lose your internet connection or anything, just rejoin the Zoom. Kendall and I can put you back into your little breakout room. If you have any issues, text or call Kendall's cell phone that she's listed in the chat. Do we have any questions before we send everyone into the breakout rooms for our discussion? Okay, so yeah, Kendall, do your magic.
There we go. Everyone should see a little button to join the breakout room.
Yeah, thanks so much for staying for the chat. Hopefully you guys had some good discussions. We have a few minutes still before we need to log off. I don't want to drag it on too long, but I actually just had a question that came up. Haley from NCC brought up a really great question that sort of sparked a bit of a discussion in our group. She was wondering, Garrett, like RDCK, is there any advice you could offer for people that are renters for like how to approach their landlord about fire smarting?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one, hey, because we do still do home assessments for renters for sure. Like if you're a renter and you want a fire smart assessment, we'll still come out and do the home assessment for you. But then when it comes to actually collecting the rebate, if you choose to do that, it might get a little bit more tricky. But that's still okay. Like you can have that conversation with your landlord and just reassure them that, hey, this is private. It won't get shared with insurance or anything like that. And you can use that assessment to either showcase things that you think they should be doing to reduce wildfire hazard, or alternatively, you could offer to do some of the work and collect the rebate, and then maybe you could share the rebate based on what you've based on your work or any money that they might put in. So that's sort of my recommendation is, yeah, you can still be involved for sure. Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm trying to get away from using the word homeowners so much. I use that word a lot. Just it's just easy to use, but it's not just homeowners, it's residents.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think like a theme that came up in our group a lot is that the fire smarting and the work that we're already doing in the environmental sector are just like very complementary. And like Megan from EKISC, for example, was saying, like she talks about fire all the time because that it has impacts with native species and invasive species. And these conversations are sort of already brewing, but it's nice to have these opportunities to learn a bit more from sort of different perspectives and just bring it all together for how we can speak to others. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have all these programs don't have to work in spite of one another, right? Like we communicate with WaterSmart, invasive species, and try to find ways where we can still provide our effective recommendations while still keeping those in mind. So they can definitely all still work in conjunction, and we can find creative solutions to, to factor everything in.
Yeah. Awesome. Juliet, did you want to bring up the Menti? Yeah.
Yes, so that leads directly into one question we have for you to just contemplate and think about your discussion, think about what you learned today. And then, given that, is there anything you'd like to incorporate into your work? So if you go to menti.com, you can do that on the computer you have Zoom on, or a different computer, or even your phone or tablet. Go to menti.com and then type in the code 8685394. And that's also in the chat. So if you want to copy and paste it from there, and you'll find the question there, and just give it a moment to think about it. Type in your answer and press submit. And then in a moment, Kendall will share the answers and we can just reflect on some of the ways that this group is going to incorporate this information into our work.
Right, there's a few entries popping up there already.
A couple of more minutes and then back over to you, Kenny.
What do you think, Juliet? Should we wrap things up?
I think that'd be great. If we can do a closing.
Okay, well, thank you so much to both our presenters for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And thank you all for participating today. I'm so glad that, yeah, we all learned so much that we can bring forward into our work. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar if you're able to join. So merci. Husuk Kukni, Kuksjam, Limlumt. Thank you.